Hi Ross, how are you?
Hi Earth, I'm great, thank you.
That's good. I'm really grateful that you could join us today, and I'm really looking forward to learning about who you are and what you're interested in. But first thing I want to ask you is, how did you find out about the Designing for Health community?
It came up through my network.
Ah, is
Somebody
that
talked about it on something. It was either LinkedIn or Facebook. I don't remember now.
oh cool? That's great. Okay. And what was it about the idea of the community that made you think, oh, I think I want to check that out?
I've always been interested in design, right? My
Oh,
background is design engineering. Then I got
yeah,
involved in technology and I've been working in health and life sciences for 25 years,
cool. Okay.
designing and building solutions. So
Yeah.
anything to do with design and usability and health and is of interest.
Okay. Um, so you said your background is in design engineering. Can you talk to me a little bit more about your personal experience of design? Do you like identify as a design practitioner? Do you call yourself a designer, or what's your relationship with design as a discipline?
Um, I got involved in, I wouldn't call myself a design practitioner. I'm an engineer who does design.
Right.
And I'm a third generation engineer. My grandfather and father were both engineers. And so my first 8 or 9 years was all design engineering, which is pretty hard type of design. But that doesn't say it isn't creative. It's actually very creative. You get a problem, the solution to the problem is not obvious often in many cases. So you then got to look at it creatively. In many ways are the same way as some of our members talk about designing for a particular health problem. You got to look at the problem from all the angles, understand its process, understand what it's doing, what it's supposed to achieve, and then start to look at how I can resolve the problem I've got. So I take that approach with everything I do. But one of the things that became very important very early on in my engineering, principally because we did a set of calculations for a design. Two of us did them over 3 months. So it's a lot of work. In those days, it was done by hand. We went out, it got constructed, built, and we then found that there was a whole heap of errors in the way it was functioning. Lots of problems. It turned out that the base information we were given as to certain things that were in situ were wrong. And that's introduced me to the concept of information management, managing the information, the baseline and the process of what you need to ensure that the right people get the right information when they need it in a format they can consume it, that it has the appropriate level of quality, integrity, that you understand who is curating that information. And that was our problem. Nobody was curating the information. Somebody had made changes in the field. It never got replicated into the office. So our baseline was wrong. And it's been a focus throughout my life of looking at that in business. I've done quite a bit of consulting with various companies, looking at how they manage their information. And I'm meaning it holistically. I'm not just meaning it what's on the computer, what's in the database, the documents, etc. It's an individual participant in a process, be they a customer, a supplier, a partner, whomever, that he or she have the information they need for them to fulfill their role. And that's been a primary driver for me in everything we design, is we look at how we can make it as easy and user-friendly for people to use. So the usability's got to be great, but at the same time that you've got the information you need. In clinical trials, one of the things they talk about is the endpoint data. What is it that's going to prove my hypothesis?
Yeah.
And a well-designed trial will understand the information, the data needed to give that information.
Yeah.
A badly designed trial doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
then get to a point of, have I actually proven my hypothesis?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
And designing for health and people with disease or disease management, it's no different. You're wanting indicators, you're wanting information that will help either the individual manage their problem better, or give them guidance, or all of those sort of things, or to alert a practitioner that he or she can then work with that person in order to help them manage their situation. And it's integral to the design process. If you don't have it right, you don't have a good design, no matter how great the UI is.
That's right. I love that. I love that observation. I should take notes because I've got 3 questions emerging. So the easiest question is what you're describing about that holistic view of the role of information and where it touches people. Would it be right to sort of, in a cliche way, describe that as an information ecosystem?
Yes, you could look at it that way.
Okay, all right.
Because it covers, because for me that covers not only what is written, it's what's spoken.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. My other question is, you use the term design engineering, and that's not a term that I've come across before. So can you just describe what you mean by that?
Okay, there's a number of different types of engineers. There's construction engineers, they build things.
Yep.
There is maintenance engineering, which is looking at the ongoing maintenance and running of things, of machines or factory or power station or whatever.
Yep.
Then you get involved in, you've got research engineers who are actually looking at new technologies, new materials. Material sciences can be seen as a form of engineering.
Yep.
And then within the engineering, you've got the design engineering. In my case, I was working for a power utility, and the design role was looking at how to protect the power grid.
Right.
And they would add new elements, new power stations, new substations, a new city. And our role was, how do we design the network to support these new people?
Yeah.
What do we need to do? And the process really goes through from a scoping exercise to identifying critical delivery points that you've got to make, to then look at what are the givens to my situation, what things have I got that I can't change.
Yeah.
And then from there, you then look and say, okay, what are my flexibilities? The statistician will look, will talk about degrees of freedom, and these are independent things. And in the design process, you look at those degrees of freedom and say, what is controlled, what's constrained, what flexibilities have I got? And out of that, you then start to develop like a strategy or a vision of how you're going to solve it. And then it's a matter of working through the mechanism of the design calculations and the prototyping and everything else until you come up with a solution on a piece of paper. And that can take 4 or 5 years for me when I was doing that work. You could be involved in a project for 4 or 5 years. And you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. Yes.
So, I mean, you've already, in what you've just described, you mentioned prototyping. I'm interested to know, as design engineers, what is the role of iteration, or what are the tools that you use to iterate at what stages?
The tools you use today are entirely different to what they were nearly 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, completely different. 30 years ago, I mean, I got involved in IT because I was modeling engineering problems. We didn't have that when I started. Today, for almost any form of engineering, and it's often for buildings and things like that, it comes out of architecture, but in nearly all engineering roles, you can model the entire system that you're building in quite powerful models. And you can then do a virtual prototype of whatever you're thinking of, what the constraints. You can prototype that virtually in the system. You can walk around it, you can look at it, you can stress test it until it breaks in many cases, especially for constructional work. The models are so powerful these days. And when I say they're incredibly powerful, but at the same time, a reasonably powerful desktop is all you need to run them. So it's not like you need supercomputers. So in that respect, you can do a lot of that prototyping work virtually. So really a lot of your design now is data. It's not actually out with a pen and pencil. That said, I've done quite a lot in the health space, looking with hospitals to improve process. And one of the things that is really important there is what I call walking the process. So we developed a nursing information system back in the early 21st century. I spent 200 hours walking around hospitals with nurses of different types in different wards doing different things, mapping what they did to understand in depth what was their role. And it meant that we were able to then build quite a powerful system to support them in that role. But the whole thing, and the thing I found really illuminating, which I think as a designers we need to be aware of, is talking to management, talking to supervisors is terrific. You get the management approach, but walking the process picks up what they didn't tell you. Picks up possibly what they don't know. And to always design from what happens today, not what theoretically happens or not what's supposed to happen. What actually happens, feet on the ground. Because if you don't understand that, the new system you create won't work. In the 90s, 70+% of all health IT systems failed. Why did they fail?
I've read that figure.
They failed because there was no meaningful engagement with the people on the ground, the people delivering the service, whatever that service might be. And it was done by analysts who often sat in an office, maybe not even on site, and weren't understanding what the real situation was. And in consequence, critical things were missed. And the other aspect that we need to be aware of is health practitioners have a very, very low tolerance for technology that doesn't work. So from that perspective, I've seen a hole in a wall where a laptop or a tablet computer was thrown by a doctor because he couldn't see the X-ray for that patient. And so we need to be aware of that. Now, technology's improved so much, but those sort of constraints still need to be, are still there. We need to consider them. We need to think about them.
So I have a question. What you're describing about that walk-through discovery phase is sort of bread and butter to designers, and it's something that we're continually trying to advocate for and trying to scope into, you know, whatever scope of work it is that we're doing. But we find it very difficult. The mindset that designers have and the language that designers use to talk about that, you know, information gathering process seems to not be aligned with how lots of different clients come to a project. Now, often they already have a solution in mind and things like that, or the sort of methodologies that we might use aren't what the client expected. So, for example, you know, a client in-house, a client might say, these are the research papers that have been published in this area. You know, this is my research. So this is the understanding that you're going to need for this project. Go away and design, you know, go away and build an app, basically. So how do you talk to potential clients about that whole information gathering walkthrough process that you've described?
In the 90s, we developed a lot of management systems and did quite a lot of business process re-engineering. So I look at it from the point of view of talking to the customer or stakeholders, is talking about the process that they're in, the process they're around, and saying, well, we need to understand what actually happens on the ground. And normally when you talk about it from the point of view of, in the case of hospitals, it could be talking about the protocol of how something's going to be done. In other areas, it might be the standard operating procedure. In other cases, it might be just a procedure. It could be talking. If you talk about it and try and understand, I think one of the things we all need to learn is to try and think and use the language of the customer.
Yeah.
Is to understand what is the language he or she is using, clarify what they might mean in certain terms, and then try and, as the consultant, say, okay, to understand that. The other thing too that I've learned over the years is you've got often, and some of your groups talk about it, as best practice and different best practice methodologies and approaches and things like that. The thing I've learned is best practice is a guide. It is not set in stone. If it's set in stone, you've got a problem. It needs to be a guide. It's telling you what is the best approach based on theoretically other people's experiences. I get concerned about academic best practice because I find in general they don't understand the real world.
Yeah.
But using that as a guideline of how can I utilize this best practice in this project, and to then think about it from the point of view on a project by project basis, and hopefully build up your personal knowledge base of approaches over time and with different complexities of customers and process to then build it out of that. So that's the approach we typically take. I have the same problem in talking to customers about information management. So many places say, oh, but we've got it all in the computer. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh, we've got it in the database. Yeah, right. Yep. And, and when you delve in and drill down a little bit, you very quickly realize that there's no custodianship, especially with data files on a computer. Nobody really knows who owns them. Nobody really knows who's managing them. But everybody believes all of the data is correct. Yeah. So you open up the spreadsheet and everybody believes every cell in it's right.
Yeah. So what's your angle then to say we need to validate the reliability of the data that's in the system? I'm assuming that the outcome that you're looking for is for the project to support you going and doing your walkthrough stuff. So how do you get from the client saying it's all in the database, it's all in the system, and you knowing that you want to go and do that exploratory walkthrough stuff? How do you take them on that journey? That's what I want to know. How do you take them on that journey?
Often I do a sample with them. I'll say, well, show me the ward.
Yeah. And
then walk along to the ward. So, okay, that's fine. Now, okay, so you've got a person going from surgery. So they're going to the ward, they're going to surgery, going to here. Okay. What happens to the medical record?
Yeah.
Medical record. I mean, is it on the end of the bed? And you get to the surgeon and say, well, where's their file? Oh, there's no file. I said, well, how does the surgeon know what they're doing?
Yeah.
Oh, and it's like that sort of identifying that in a non-confrontational way of saying, well, okay. And often I will take it like, have I missed something? Where's the file gone?
Yeah.
And they go, oh, that should be here. So, well, this is a problem. It needs to be.
Yeah.
So it's then you're identifying to them that they recognise as a problem.
Yes.
And if they recognise a problem, they're going to buy into doing something about it. Sometimes it might be that you start by doing just a preliminary, I want to understand your business. I want to understand the health situation I'm in. Can you walk me through it? Maybe let's go for a walk around, the nursing home or the aged care home or whatever it is. Show me what a ward looks like. So and take it as if I'm learning about it.
Yeah.
And then you can then start to gain your knowledge of that real situation, and then ask questions that are open-ended, but also exploring issues that you're seeing together.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes, thank you. I think that's very wise, and I think that's a great model of how to behave. How to engage with clients and how to elicit those gaps and help the client to see it from your perspective in a way, really. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, we use that in our clinical system. Our research platform that people use for clinical trials. And over time, we've gone back to customers over and over again, and we've now had the same platform running for 18 years. But in that time, we've talked to customers on an annual basis. What's happening? What is the pain point in the project you just finished? Oh, I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. And then to look at what's happening internationally and introduce things like patient-informed consent to be able to make that electronic online rather than 30 pieces of paper. To then look at people and say, okay, when they talk about the outcome of a patient that's had a surgery for a knee implant, for example, a prosthetic, and say, okay, well, would a clinical outcome assessment module help where their physician and GP can enter information, the patient can enter information as to how their new knee or new hip is working for them. So then out of that say, okay, we'll do those sort of things. In COVID times, where normally a monitor would go out to a hospital or a clinic to look at records, we're now doing that virtually. So that site will now scan the relevant documents, put them in the system as an eSource document. The monitor can then sit back in the office or at home and they can do their monitoring. So this is where you're then changing the system and the platforms in order to do that. And so that's the sort of thing. And like with COVID, we've re-envisaged our platform to be completely on demand. So our customers can come in and go, I want a new project, bang, it's running, ready to go. They don't have to fiddle, they don't have to play around, it's immediate. In fact, that's one of the things we're working on at the moment, is to take and leverage our existing technology to create a platform for delivering health applications, multiple different types of application, because so much of the data is common. Records are common, processes are common, audit trails, controls, roles, all of those things are common. And yet so many different apps go and rebuild them and rebuild them and rebuild them.
Yes.
Some well, some not so well. And then you get into, you've got to integrate it with My Health Record, or you've got to integrate it with the hospital. All of those things are very expensive individually. If you're trying to do a health startup, that's really hard, because so many of them are siloed into their little bit of the health continuum. And for it to help for a person with a complex need, it has to be hooked to all the other things, that their GP can see that data, their specialist, the hospital, they can get lab results, radiography, all of those things need to be brought together. And so what we're looking at the moment is, can we take our existing technology, leverage the core, add these integrational components to give a designer the ability to come online, prototype their new idea using standardized apps and standardized web clients, and then go, is this going to work? Has it got legs? Is it going to fly? And you go, yes, it is going to fly. It's going to solve this problem. And then say, okay, now we've proven it. We can go and get funding, decent funding. We can now come up with our app-specific client that's really got a user experience designed for that particular purpose. But we can also leverage integration into My Health Record, integration into GP practice systems to enable. So it means that to the developer of the app, they are able to prototype that their idea works.
Yeah.
And have iterative prototype. They can do it many times if they need to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Secondly, they can then look at they look at their back end processes. They can prototype it. They can, when they go to having proven it, they're reducing the cost to an investor because they can demonstrate quickly whether or not it's going to work, rather than spend $500,000.
Yeah.
They can get themselves up and running quickly, and they can do it without having to have a team of software engineers and software developers trying to code away to build everything.
Yeah. So at what stage is that at? Are you like beta testing?
No, it's at a strategic level. I'm working with a couple of colleagues as we go through critically looking at the elements we need to have, how it needs to hook together so that we understand the platform. And hopefully, I'm hoping by the early part of next year, I'll have some working documents because it'd be really great to get people's feedback. You know, it's a fairly big project.
We'll take that conversation offline. I just want to put my hand up. I'm very, very interested in that. I'm salivating.
I mean, it'll be done in stages. The first bit will be get something that people can play with. And then to work out of that, because we're going to need to get some investment funding for the integration aspect, which is not inconsiderate. You know, it's a fairly expensive exercise. But it also means that things like the client on a mobile app or a phone, we can start to leverage common technology. So like the Apple Health Kit, the Android equivalent, there's a number of providers of systems that hook into the likes of Fitbits and other bits and pieces. Now, utilizing that once, you can then operate across multiple apps that can all be sitting in the one platform, consuming the data they need, and reducing their cost. So that's our next strategy, our next product.
Love it. What a fantastic vision. I love it, Ross. Now, we have 4 more minutes. I just want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the design of clinical trials and endpoint data. So disclosure, I have a pet theory that when we're in a design, when we're doing design, it can be helpful to understand some of those endpoint data requirements that are not directly relevant to the design project, but if we understand that they exist sort of as a priority for the client, sometimes we can find ways for what we're designing to speak to that, to deliver some of that data, or to support some of that data. And so do you have like conversations with clients about the sort of how close to the pin? So you talked about, you know, poorly designed trials don't actually deliver the endpoint data that they're going to need to test their hypothesis. Do you get into conversations with clients about that? Like, do you give them a bit of a quality?
Oh, yeah. As a software provider, I'm not supposed to. But it should be the client statistician who tells them that. But often the statistician gets brought in a bit later and the protocol's been written and approved. And it's all about that formulation of the actual protocol or the scope of works, if you like, project. I always ask that. The reason we ask it is that we often get involved in designing the data collection forms. When I say designing, all we're basically saying is this form has got 5 fields on it, this one's got 6 and 3 are selections and stuff like that, because the layout is actually fixed deliberately. That was an interesting point. We were designing forms a long time ago, and I was teaching people how to use various packages, and the people were spending huge amounts of time moving things around a page, one pixel at a time. And the customer saying, but my forms are not being produced, I can't use them. And I'm saying, well, and then I realized, this is in the latter 90s, if we standardize the layout, get a layout that everybody's comfortable with, the designer can then think about the information that they're working, rather than whether it's 3 pixels to the left or right, and which shade of pink is it going to be. And I mean, from a design UI point of view, that's absolutely critical. But on the larger scale of a piece of information that you're dealing with the health of a person and a continuum, and you're wanting to deal with and control and manage it, it's the understanding of that information. So to me, that endpoint info is really important, principally because we try to build that data point or that stream of data points into the actual design so that the customer can monitor it. So the customer might have a project that's going to go for 4 years. Well, we had a project with one of the big pharma for supposedly 2 years. The endpoints were well defined. People coming into this were very sick. They had a 3-month life expectancy.
Oh, dear.
The medications they were testing was a new combination of existing drugs. And surprise, surprise, they had 2 people that survived 3 years. So the project ended up going for 4 because we had to go until those people actually, whether they went into remission, which was never likely to happen, or they passed away. So you can have a situation where the endpoint, while well defined, can stretch. But the thing with that was understanding what is the actual piece of information, the data that will give you that information, and how does it work. So we try to build that in so we can build part of the analytics that they can view it as a dashboard and say, click, oh, yes, I'm on track today. Whoops, no, that's not doing well. I better look at what's going on. So, and the same thing with the health situation. If you've got a continuum, for example, a person who's got diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and you say, okay, I want you to monitor your glucose. Well, if you can collect the glucose information easily and quickly, and like there's one really simple way you can get the glucose meter. The new ones are Bluetooth to the phone. The older ones, there's an app that you can take that takes a photograph of the phone and then resolves out of that what the numbers are, and then stores the numbers. Now, if you can then bring that through and then look at the analytics of what is the baseline for this patient, and then look at the margins of alerts above and below for that person, you can then monitor the person over long periods of time. You know they're not normal, but you can then get a normality of and this is where you can then train AI things to look at that. And then you've got meaningful information. Now that can be fed into their physicians. The person can see it themselves. I mean, most people, if you think about it, who are reasonably well educated, well, I'm going to say that they're literate. If they've got a major disease, they will research it. They will want to understand what it is. And that's a really good thing that you can do today. 20, 30 years ago, you couldn't do that.
No. So I just want to take you back. So you've described a scenario where the protocol's been written, they've gotten funding based on the protocol that's been submitted in the funding application. So it's been sort of set in stone what data it is that they're going to collect, and then you come along and you say it's not really going to test, there's a misalignment between what's going to be collected and what the assertion in your hypothesis or what the question in your hypothesis is. How do you have that conversation with the client? How do you resolve that?
I ask them, what you want me to collect?
Right.
How do you want me to substantiate this? And in some trials, it's not a single point of data, right? It's not a single data value. It's a collection of maybe 4 or 5 data values. We can't monitor all of those. Some of them need to be, the statistician will analyze them. So that's fine. So it's a situation of what that data is and whether we can measure it. We like to measure it because it means we can then give the customer a means of being able to monitor it, self-monitor that information as part of their project management and part of their process management, to be able to, because if you can give people the tools to do that for our customers, it's something that they really appreciate because it's helping them understand what's going on. And because the idea for them is to either prove the efficacy of the clinical approach they're taking, which could be a therapy. It may not be just testing drugs. It could be testing an existing drug in a new circumstance or with a new population of people. So there's a variety of ways that it can come up, and it's a matter of having that conversation. Sometimes people look at it and go, oh, yes, I need to go away and have a think about it. Okay, and we've had that situation where somebody's gone away and come, yeah, that was a really good point. And yes, we've refined the protocol. Is this a problem?
Right.
Typically it's not. So it's other customers just do their own thing.
Yeah, just helping them to sort of look at the problem area with a bit of a fresh eye. Okay.
Well, in our case, if they have a problem project, people like to blame somebody for it. And I don't like being blamed for it.
Yes. That's right. Oh, yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day about a client who had signed off on like a design project, said everything was fine, then the client decided they wanted to iterate and started to take it down and maybe not such a good idea path, and they were saying, you know, what do I do? And you know, they felt like the locus of responsibility, where did that sit? Because, you know, they had previously sort of been responsible for the design, but it was unclear about who was going to be responsible for what was happening. And
that's always a hard conversation.
Yeah. And I said to them, well, think of it, and this person works in health, I said, think of it as you are a clinician and you're talking to your patient about their lifestyle and risk factors, and you have a duty of care to alert them to the behaviours and the choices that are going to introduce more risk. But at the end of the day, they're entitled to choose, you know, to live the life. So I said, think of it as that way. It's like a duty of care. I'm alerting you to some risks if you go down this path. And I sort of felt like that helped with the sort of avoiding the blame. At least if you can frame giving them advice about, you know, that's not what I would advise you to do.
No, I think it's always a really, really tough call on that. And I think it's something that experience helps you with.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is, which is hard for you when you're young, you don't have, I suppose you could say, the gravitas of time. I can get away with things that a 30-year-old can't, because I can say, well, in 1980 we did this, 1990 we did that, 95 we did that. I mean, you know, we did our first mobile app in 96. So you're like, I've been around, I've done it. So when you say, I don't think that's going to work, they're going to turn around and go, question mark, even if they don't want to agree to it. Where if you're 25 and come in and say, well, based on best practice and this and that and the other thing, that may not work. I go, and if they're in their 30s and early 40s, I go, yeah, right, I know better. So there is that issue. But if it's a critical issue to performance of the solution, this comes down to your project management of your solution as an organisation when you're with your customer. I mean, we have a fairly formal process for that, where we write a scope, what the scope is, what are the primary, secondary objectives, who's responsible for this. And if it's a significant project, we have a project board, which has got stakeholders for all sides involved in it. And then to sit down at that board level and say, okay, I have an issue with this, and flag the issue. The thing that in project management, if you look at the project management in software engineering, I actually formally studied it.
Okay.
Most projects, I did that in the 90s, software engineering. And one of the seminal researchers in the US identified that projects that go off rails you can typically pick the project within 10% from its start time in
Yeah.
the first 10%,
Yeah.
because things will start to run late early, and that
Yeah.
just cascade.
Yeah.
And his approach, which we use, which I think works really well, some
Mm.
people don't like it much, is an activity has 3 states.
Okay.
It hasn't started,
Yep.
it's in progress, or it's completed.
Yep. Okay.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
You then cut your project activities down to a project must be less than one reporting cycle. Activity must be less than one reporting cycle. So if you've got a monthly reporting cycle,
Right.
formal reporting,
Yeah.
the activities must be less than a month long. If it's weekly, it must be less than a week.
Right.
Because what that means is every activity
Yeah.
at a reporting cycle, it has either not started, has
Yeah.
started, or completed. If
Yeah.
the same activity is at the next reporting cycle, it's late.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really obvious.
Yeah. That
And
sounds like it sounds like it has a close affinity with agile. I mean, that's, like,
yeah,
it sounds like it's a sprint type of structure. Yeah.
Well, sprint, agile, I mean, all of these things are just renamed other approaches that have been around for 30 years.
Yes. Yes.
I mean,
yes.
when I studied
Well,
my engineering,
the Agile Manifesto was, when was that? Early.
2021 or 2.
Oh, really?
But
Oh, I thought it was earlier than that. Okay.
some aspects of agile was earlier than that. It developed out
Yeah.
of cyclic development.
Yeah.
Scrum was a later inversion of it. So, things like that have been around. The approaches have been around for a long time. The introduction, the thing about agile was to the introduction of the stakeholders or stakeholder representatives into the development team. That was the crucial bit that's changed. Cycle development was customers outside the door, the development teams inside the door with their cycle.
Yeah.
Agile brought those people into the team.
Yeah.
That's what made the big difference.
Cool.
And Scrum is basically agile with an end date on it.
Yes, yes. Well, we're well over our 30 minutes, Ross.
That's
so
okay.
I need to release you.
That's all right.
I feel like we could keep talking for hours. This has been very, very enriching. Thank you so much. It's lovely to speak to someone with so much experience and wisdom who's willing to share. So
I'm more than happy to share. And that's the other aspect of being a member is I'm more than happy to talk to young groups or teams or come in or mentor or whatever for people in a team that have got a problem, because sometimes an extra set of eyes can see a perspective that others haven't looked at. The other thing is I get to learn too. Just because I've been around for a while doesn't mean I know it all.
Okay.
I get to learn.
Good on you, Ross. That's absolutely.
Anyway, keep in touch.
Oh, I will. And if I have your permission, I'll let the community know Ross is
absolutely.
Ross is available for mentoring. And I bet I know you'll get people. Okay. That's fantastic.
Not a problem. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
See you later.
I'll
Bye.
end the recording. Thanks, Ross. Bye.
Bye-bye.